But he wasn't really a villain. I think Aaron Sorkin made Sean Parker more into a villain than in my book, Accidental Billionaires. In my book, I think Sean really has his eyes on the prize, wants to create $1 billion company, wants to make a unicorn, and he's got this vision. He sees Facebook and says, this is it. But he's not really evil. But when you watch the movie, he certainly comes off as the bad guy, tearing at the relationship between Mark and Eduardo. So I think that's a little bit more what Aaron Sorkin did than what I did. But yeah, I find Sean very compelling. I think he's a really smart guy, and I would write about Sean again if given the opportunity. But anyways, the Winklevoss twins, at first, to me, I liked them always, and I respected them because they never lie. These are guys who were very much this sort of 1950s ideal of right and wrong. You don't cheat, you don't lie, you don't steal. That's all real, this whole Men of Harvard thing. The thing about Mark that upset them the most was that he lied, that he was duplicitous, that he pretended to work for them and then didn't, that he created this company behind their noses when he could have simply come to them because they were working together and they had money. So he basically cheated them, and that to them is the ultimate sin. So for them, as long as you're honest and you're telling the truth, they respect you, and I respect them for that. But in the story of The Social Network, they definitely were the guys who were the bad guys in a way, because they were the guys who were the big jocks who had this dating website that Mark built Facebook, maybe after seeing their code or whatever, but they were suing him, and you couldn't tell whether it was right or wrong. It wasn't until much later that I kind of changed my view of the Winklevoss twins.
Interesting. And speaking to that as well, wasn't there some sort of a settlement meeting at a lawyer's office where Mark was freaked out that those guys were going to beat the shit out of them or something? So only one could go in?
Yeah, this is in my book, Bitcoin Billionaires, and this was not in The Social Network. But basically, they had been involved in this negotiation for a long time. And finally, the Winklevoss twins said, you know what, let's just sit down with Mark, just one-on-one. We're a bunch of college kids. We used to hang out. Let's just all get into a room and talk this out. No more lawyers. And so they sent this request over to Mark's lawyers. Mark's lawyers come back and say, well, he agrees in concept, but he has a concern. And it turns out he was concerned they were going to beat him up. So Mark made this rule that only one of them could come into the meeting. So the meeting took place in this glass office with all the lawyers sitting in a circle around it. And Mark met with one Winklevoss twin.
As if he could take one of them, right?
Right. He's going to fight a 6'5" rower. But anyways, they sat across from each other and they kind of attempted to work it out. After that meeting, Mark settled with them for what was originally $65 million. The twins were not happy with this agreement. So the only way they accepted it was to accept it in stock. They didn't want any cash. Their lawyers argued with them, and they ended up getting into a massive argument with their own lawyers because their lawyers wanted to take the $65 million in cash. But the twins wanted to be a part of Facebook because they really felt that they had helped invent it. So they took their portion in stock, and that ended up being worth $500 million after the IPO.
So how did they originally only get 65 million, but Eduardo got 5-6 billion?
Eduardo had, Mark had agreed to Eduardo in the very beginning to give him 30% of Facebook.
Okay.
That was the agreement between two college kids in a dorm room. There's no lawyers, there's no contracts. And so the question always becomes, if you and your buddy come up with some idea, and then he goes and makes the company, and he builds it into this $1 billion company, what do you deserve? And when I ask entrepreneurs that question, they always say, well, he doesn't really deserve that much. But if you ask venture capitalists that question, they say, oh, he deserves half because he was there at the beginning. He put up the money. He should get his percentage. So the settlement was not, was based on that, was based on what he was supposed to get from the very beginning.
So Mark sort of did honor his verbal agreement with him.
No, he didn't want to.
Okay.
I think the book made him. I think they really thought they could stop this book and this movie from happening. So I really think the book was the reason he settled.
So the twins, after they took their 65 million in shares with Facebook, this is where everything sort of goes to your story on the Bitcoin billionaires.
Yeah.
How do these guys become Bitcoin billionaires?
Yeah. So basically, the Winklevoss twins get this settlement. and they decide they're going to become venture capitalists. So they're going to go out to California and start seeding companies. And they go out there and find out no one will take their money, because everyone's end game in Silicon Valley is to sell to Facebook. And if you have the Winklevoss twins, on your ledger, Mark won't buy your company. And so the Winklevoss twins are upset. And so they went to Ibiza to party, which is what you do when you're upset. And so they were on the beach in Ibiza, and somebody came up to them and said, have you guys ever heard of Bitcoin? And they had not at the time. They didn't really know anything about it. Bitcoin at the time was a few dollars, $5, $10. It was a brand new thing. And they looked into it and were kind of blown away by it and thinking either this is total bullshit or it's the next big thing. And they became convinced it was the next big thing. And then they bought in hugely. They bought 200,000 Bitcoin at around $7 a coin. So their goal was to own 1% of all Bitcoin. And part of that story as well is the person who would come to them was an associate of Charlie Shrem. Charlie was one of the first, initial Bitcoin entrepreneurs. He was an 18-year-old kid living in his parents' basement, who basically fell into Bitcoin online, as a lot of people at that time did, thought it was cool, and started a website, something called BitInstant, where you could buy and sell Bitcoin. That was the idea. Because at the time, to buy Bitcoin, it was very hard. You had to go through this weird Japanese website called Mt. Gox, which was very corrupt, which ended up going out of business after it was looted. And that there was no good way to buy Bitcoin. So Charlie started a company where you could give him money and he would give you Bitcoin. It was like a middleman Bitcoin company. And the Winklevoss twins were one of his first, they gave him a $1.5 million in financing. Roger Ver was his other financer. Roger, if you know who he is, anarchistic, libertarian. He was one of the first Bitcoin investors. They used to call him Bitcoin Jesus because he had funded so many of these companies. He's a billionaire as well. But he believed that Bitcoin would bring down governments, that Bitcoin would bring down taxes. He did not believe in the military. He does not believe that taxes should happen. He really is a true, revolutionary in a way. And so he and the Winklevoss twins are complete opposites in how they approach this world. And there was a lot of tension between them, and ended up being the core of my book, Bitcoin Billionaires. Charlie was in the middle. Charlie was a kid who was caught up in this world of Bitcoin. He has the Winklevoss twins on one hand, who are the men of Harvard. They believe in right and wrong. They believe that Bitcoin should be a financial instrument, part of, all the different financial instruments, that it should eventually be on the stock exchange, as a commodity, basically. And you have Roger Ver, who thinks Bitcoin should take down governments. You should be able to buy drugs if you want. Total freedom, anarchy, and libertarianism. And so Charlie gets pulled in both directions.
Meaning like that it should be completely autonomous of banks or anything like that?
Well, they both believe that. So the cool thing about Bitcoin is there's no middleman. There's no need for a bank. There's no need for a government. There's no need for anybody in between me and you. I can buy and sell Bitcoin to you without anybody being in between us, the same way I send a text or an email. They all like that. But what Roger Ver believes is that there should be no regulations. It should be basically Silk Road all the time. You want to go buy drugs on Silk Road, go buy drugs on Silk Road. You don't want to pay taxes, keep your money in Bitcoin, no one pay taxes. And that's not the way the Winklevoss twins see it. They see it as something that should have some level of regulation so that it's safe, that Bitcoin will never be popular unless my mother can use Bitcoin, without worrying that it's going to, get stolen, or that she's going to get attacked by the IRS, or, something like that. So they believe that Bitcoin needs to get away from the sort of cowboy past, the idea that it's just for criminals and things like that, as opposed to someone like Roger Ver, who believes that Bitcoin was made to be anonymous because it gives you the powers that anonymity gives you, the ability to sort of not be involved in the real world, and to not have a government looking over your shoulder, to not pay taxes, for instance. And that's a very different way of looking at it.
So what are the Winklevoss twins doing today in regards to?
So the Winklevoss twins, are billionaires because of this investment. They have launched something called Gemini, which is an exchange where you can buy and sell Bitcoin. It's regulated. It's part of the New York financial sort of network over there. It's guaranteed, so you don't have to worry about your money. So Gemini is their main project, and they're also proselytizers. They travel the world promoting Bitcoin, explaining why it's the money of the future. There's a big question of whether it's a commodity or whether it's a currency. Is it going to be like gold, something you grab and hold on to and increases in value, or is it going to be something that you use to buy and sell things? Right now, for the most part, it's like gold, but better because you can carry it around on your phone. It's not some big vault somewhere, and it's instantly transferable. So I can send you a Bitcoin. Can't send you a piece of gold.
It's not something you can touch.
Right. It's not, but it exists. So it's kind of this weird thing where it's both virtual and physical because you actually carry it around with you, but it doesn't really exist anywhere. So yes, it's an interesting sort of phenomenon. But
what do you mean you can carry it around with you? Like meaning that it's like it's stored just like a file on your computer?
Except for it's not in your computer. So you get a hash, you get a specific address where your Bitcoin is, and you have a code to get your Bitcoin. And that's all you have. So that code is your Bitcoin. Your Bitcoin isn't held anywhere. There's something called the blockchain. So when you exchange Bitcoin, that is logged onto this thing called the blockchain, which is like this virtual brick wall. And each brick is connected to the other brick, connected to the other brick.